All right, so today we're going to be venturing into some pretty wild territory.
Yeah,
Quantum emotional field theory.
right.
Um, the idea that emotions might actually operate like,
Oh, wow.
wait for it, quantum fields.
Yeah, that's a big one.
I know it sounds crazy, but bear with me on this one, folks. It's going to be a wild ride.
Yeah, it's a fascinating concept. I mean, it really challenges how we typically think about emotions,
Yeah.
We tend to view them as these fleeting, subjective experiences, but
Right.
what if they're more than that?
Hmm.
What if they have a quantifiable structure, a measurable energy, like other fields in physics?
So we're talking about emotions having like a presence beyond just our own experience of them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, these two academic papers on quantum emotional field theory, or QEF theory,
Okay.
propose just that emotions,
All right.
they argue, are dynamic entities that exist as fields.
As fields.
They suggest that emotions aren't just chemical reactions in our brains, but
Right.
quantifiable and potentially measurable.
Okay, so not just a chemical surge, but an actual field.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to wrap my head around that.
Yeah, it's a big one.
Does that mean our feelings are more like, say, gravity or light,
Okay.
existing as possibilities until we kind of tune in to them?
That's a great way to think about it.
Yeah.
It's similar to the observer effect in quantum physics, where observation influences what becomes reality.
Right.
QEF theory suggests our minds tune into particular emotional states,
Okay.
making them more likely to manifest.
So instead of emotions being solely internal,
Yeah.
they might have this external presence, a field that we're interacting with.
Mm-hmm.
And our observation, our focus, influences what part of that field we experience as an emotion.
That's the core idea.
Okay.
It's a bit like choosing a radio station. You're selecting a frequency from a whole spectrum of possibilities.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not just one thing, it's a whole bunch of different things.
Whole spectrum.
And what about the organization of these emotional frequencies, these fields? The research mentions something called emotional flavors and a hierarchy, which is intriguing.
Yes.
How does that fit in?
This is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
QEF theory proposes there are core emotional states:
Okay.
joy, sadness, anger, fear, security.
Got it.
But each of these core states has various flavors, nuances, or variations.
Okay.
Like, think of joy, and you have happiness, contentment, excitement, even jubilation.
Right.
Each a distinct flavor of that core joy.
So it's not a simple on-off switch for each emotion.
Right.
There's this whole spectrum of intensity and nuance.
Exactly. And those flavors are structured hierarchically, starting from the core emotion and branching out to increasingly specific feelings.
Okay.
So from joy, you get happiness, but from happiness, you might then experience a more nuanced flavor like serenity.
So maybe we could picture it like a tree.
Oh, okay.
The trunk is joy.
Hmm.
The branches are the flavors like happiness or excitement, and then further branches growing off those for even more nuanced feelings.
It's a great analogy. It helps to visualize this idea of an emotional hierarchy, where feelings connect and evolve from one another.
But here's where my brain starts to melt a little.
Okay.
This source mentions giving numerical values to these emotional states.
Right.
Quantifying feelings.
Yeah.
How is that even possible? It seems so subjective.
It's a complex idea, and there's no single agreed-upon method.
Right.
One proposed approach uses numerical scales.
Okay.
For example, assigning joy a value of 1.0 and maybe despair a value of -2.0.
So theoretically, my mood could be plotted on a chart.
You could have an emotional graph.
That's wild.
Yeah.
But it also raises questions about what we're actually measuring. Is it the intensity of the feeling, the duration, or something else entirely?
That's a key point.
Yeah.
Quantifying emotions isn't about assigning absolute values like measuring temperature.
Okay.
It's more about creating a framework to understand the relationships between different emotional states and their potential impact.
And I imagine the way we measure these fields would have to account for all those flavors we discussed earlier, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because contentment might register differently on a scale than, say, ecstatic joy.
For sure. And it's not just about self-reporting how we feel on a scale.
Right.
Researchers are exploring ways to measure physiological changes linked to emotion,
Right.
heart rate, brain activity, to potentially get a more objective picture of these fields.
This is all pretty mind-boggling, but I'm curious to see where it leads.
Yeah.
It's making me rethink what an emotion even is, not just a fleeting feeling, but maybe this dynamic energy field we're all part of and interacting with.
And that leads us to one of the most fascinating aspects of QEF theory.
Okay. What's that?
The idea that these fields, these emotions can become entangled with each other,
Okay.
similar to particles in quantum physics.
Okay, entanglement.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about two or more emotions, or even people's emotions becoming linked in a way that they influence each other.
Exactly. It gets pretty deep.
Oh, boy.
We'll unpack that more later. But for now, it's worth pondering if our emotions can be entangled. How might that be playing out in your own life, in your relationships, even in society as a whole? Just something to think about.
All right. Well, we'll have to keep thinking about that.
Yes.
And we'll be back after a quick break.
Sounds good.
Okay, so we're back and ready to really, dig into this concept of emotional entanglement.
Yeah.
Like, before the break, we were talking about, emotions potentially being linked like particles in quantum physics.
Right.
It's a bit of a leap for me. So, walk me through this.
Sure.
What would emotional entanglement even look like in real life?
Well, it's a concept that challenges our everyday understanding of emotions. Think about those times when you've walked into a room and instantly felt the mood.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe everyone's tense or there's a palpable sense of excitement in the air.
Yeah, I've definitely walked into situations where I'm like, whoa, what's
Yeah.
going on here? And I could just feel the energy.
Right.
But is that really entanglement or just us being sensitive to other people's emotions?
No, that's the key question. QEF theory suggests it could be more than just empathy or picking up on social cues.
Okay.
It proposes that our emotional fields can actually become intertwined. So we're not just sensing another person's feelings, but experiencing them in a deeper, more interconnected way.
So, if my friend is going through a tough time and feeling really down,
Yeah.
their sadness could actually be affecting my own emotional state, even if I don't consciously realize it.
That's one way to think about it. It's like those two particles in quantum physics.
Right.
Even when separated, they still influence each other.
So then imagine the implications for relationships.
Huge, right?
Think about how a partner's anxiety might impact your own sense of calm, or how a parent's joy can uplift a child's mood.
Exactly.
I can see how that could explain why some relationships feel so draining, like you're constantly being pulled into someone else's emotional turmoil. But what about those relationships that are really positive and uplifting? Could entanglement be playing a role there too?
Absolutely. In fact, QEF theory suggests those positive, supportive relationships might involve a harmonious form of entanglement.
Okay.
It's like the feels are resonating together, amplifying the positive emotions and creating a sense of shared joy and connection.
So it's not just that we're happy because we're with someone we love.
Right.
It's that our happiness is literally intertwined, feeding off each other.
Precisely. It's a fascinating idea.
It really is.
And it opens up a whole new way of thinking about empathy and compassion.
Okay.
If we're truly entangled with others, then caring for their well-being isn't just a moral obligation.
Right.
It's a way of nurturing our own emotional ecosystem.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this idea of emotional entanglement could have a profound impact on how we understand relationships. But let's shift gears a bit and talk about something we touched on earlier, the practical side of QEF theory.
Okay.
If we accept that emotions operate like these fields, how can we use that knowledge to improve our own lives?
That's where the empowering part of QEF theory comes in. It suggests that by understanding the nature of these fields, we can learn to navigate them more skillfully and potentially even influence them. Think about a gardener tending to their plants.
Yeah.
They understand the conditions that allow those plants to thrive.
Right.
Similarly, we can learn to cultivate those internal conditions that support emotional well-being.
So instead of being at the mercy of our emotions, we can become more like emotional gardeners tending to our inner landscape.
Exactly.
Okay, I like that. So what kind of gardening tools would we use in this case?
Well, there are several techniques that QEF theory points to, and
Right.
one of the most fundamental is mindfulness.
Okay.
It's about becoming more aware of our emotional state in the present moment, observing those feelings without judgment.
Mindfulness, it seems like everyone's talking about that these days.
That's a hot topic.
Yeah, but how does it actually help us manage these emotional fields?
Well, think back to that radio analogy. Mindfulness is like being aware of what station you're tuned into, recognizing those negative thought patterns or emotional frequencies that might be contributing to your distress.
Okay.
It's about acknowledging those feelings without getting swept away by them.
So it's not about suppressing emotions or pretending we're not feeling them.
Right.
It's more about creating some space between ourselves and those feelings.
Exactly.
So we can choose how to respond.
Cultivating that observer perspective, that awareness of what's happening within our emotional field without getting caught up in the drama.
Okay, so mindfulness is like step one, becoming aware of our emotional landscape. But what about those deep-rooted patterns?
Yes.
Those emotional grooves that we keep falling back into?
Right.
How do we address those?
That's where cognitive reframing comes in. It's about challenging those habitual thought patterns that are contributing to those negative emotional states.
Okay.
Often our thoughts are like a distorted lens,
Hmm.
coloring how we perceive the world and fueling those unwanted feelings.
So it's about becoming aware of those thought patterns and then consciously choosing to see things from a different perspective.
Precisely. It's not about denying reality or putting on rose-colored glasses,
Right.
but rather questioning those limiting beliefs and replacing them with more empowering thoughts.
That makes sense, but it seems like a lot of our emotional well-being depends on how we deal with those external emotional influences,
Yeah,
those situations or people who might be dragging us down.
for sure.
How can we navigate those challenges from a QEF perspective?
That's where the concept of boundaries comes in.
Okay.
If our emotional fields can be entangled, then it's crucial to be mindful of who and what we're allowing into our energetic space.
So it's not just about physical boundaries, but emotional ones as well.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we have the right to protect our own emotional well-being and to create a safe space for ourselves where we can thrive.
Okay.
Sometimes that means limiting contact with people who consistently drain our energy,
Yeah.
or being mindful of the environments we choose to spend our time in.
So setting boundaries is like creating an energetic shield, protecting ourselves from those negative emotional influences.
That's a great analogy.
I like that.
It's about being intentional about the emotional frequencies we're exposing ourselves to. It's just like we're mindful of the food we eat or the information we consume.
This all makes so much sense, and it's giving me like a whole new perspective on how I can approach my own emotional well-being.
Good.
But I have to admit, I'm still a bit skeptical about the idea that we can actually control these emotional fields. Is it really that simple?
It's not necessarily about control, but rather about influence. Just as a skilled surfer learns to ride the waves,
Right.
we can learn to ride the waves of our emotions with greater awareness and skill.
And just like surfing takes practice,
Yeah,
I imagine mastering our emotional fields is an ongoing process, right?
absolutely. It's a journey, not a destination.
Yeah.
And there are many tools and techniques that can support us along the way.
Well, before we get too carried away with riding those emotional waves, let's take a moment to hear from our listeners. What are your thoughts on this idea of emotional entanglement and its potential impact on our lives? All right, so we're back, and we've explored some pretty mind-bending concepts like emotions as fields, entanglement, the idea that we can influence these fields. But I'm curious, how do we actually put all this into practice?
That's the key question, right? It's one thing to kind of understand these ideas intellectually, but how can we actually use them to live more fulfilling lives, you know?
Right, because I'm guessing just knowing about emotional fields isn't going to magically solve all our problems.
Definitely not. No, it requires a conscious effort to shift our relationship with our emotions, to become more like those emotional gardeners we were talking about earlier.
So what are some practical steps we can take to actually cultivate like a thriving inner emotional landscape?
Well, we've already touched on mindfulness and cognitive reframing as kind of essential tools.
Right.
But there are other techniques that QEF theory highlights. And one that's particularly powerful is what's often called intentional field reinforcement.
Okay, intentional field reinforcement. It sounds a bit technical. Break that down for me.
Yeah, it's simpler than it sounds.
Yep.
It's about actively cultivating and amplifying those positive emotional states that we want to experience, more of like a gardener nurturing their favorite plants.
Yeah.
We can nurture those positive emotions within ourselves.
So it's not just about dealing with the negative stuff. It's about proactively creating more of the good stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, we've been focusing a lot on managing negative emotions, setting boundaries, protecting our energy, but intentional field reinforcement is about feeding those positive emotions, making them stronger, more readily accessible.
I like that. So how do we do that? Do we just like sit around thinking happy thoughts?
Well, it's a bit more nuanced than that. There are many approaches. Gratitude practices are a great example.
Okay.
Taking time each day to appreciate the good things in our lives, big or small, can really shift our emotional frequency toward a more positive state.
So instead of focusing on what's wrong or what we lack, we're intentionally focusing on what's going right.
Exactly. It's about training our attention, like a mental spotlight on those things that bring us joy, peace, love, gratitude. It's a really powerful way to strengthen those positive emotional pathways.
I can see how that makes sense. It's like building up a muscle, but for our emotions.
Mhm.
What are some other examples of intentional field reinforcement?
Well, engaging in activities that bring us joy is another key aspect.
Okay.
It could be anything, spending time in nature, listening to uplifting music, creating art, connecting with loved ones, anything that genuinely makes us feel good.
So it's about making like a conscious effort to weave those activities into our daily lives, not just waiting for them to happen randomly.
Exactly. It's about being proactive in shaping our emotional landscape rather than passively reacting to whatever life throws our way. Remember that radio analogy?
Yeah.
We're choosing to tune into the station that's playing the music we love rather than enduring whatever static is playing.
That's such a good analogy. It's so empowering. But let's be real. Real life isn't always sunshine and roses. Even with all the mindfulness and positive reinforcement in the world, we're still going to experience difficult emotions. So how does QEF theory help us navigate those rough patches?
Well, it's true, challenges are inevitable, but QEF theory offers a different perspective on how we approach them. Instead of seeing those difficult emotions as enemies to be conquered or suppressed, we can view them as valuable signals, messages from our emotional field trying to tell us something.
So instead of pushing those emotions away, we kind of lean into them and try to understand what they're trying to teach us.
Exactly. Those challenging emotions often arise when our needs aren't being met or when something is out of balance. Maybe it's a boundary that needs to be set, a conversation that needs to be had, or a change that needs to be made. By listening to those signals, we can start to identify the root cause of our distress and take steps to address it.
This is all making me rethink my own emotional journey. It's not about achieving some perfect state of perpetual happiness. It's about learning to navigate the full spectrum of human emotions with greater awareness, compassion, and skill.
Well said. It's a journey of continuous learning and growth, and QEF theory provides a fascinating framework to guide us along the way. And who knows, maybe by understanding and working with these emotional fields, we can create a ripple effect that extends beyond ourselves, influencing our relationships, our communities, even the world at large.
That's a beautiful thought and a hopeful note to end on. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, and I want to thank you, dear listener, for joining us on this journey into the uncharted territory of quantum emotional field theory. It's a complex topic, but one that I believe has the potential to transform how we understand ourselves and the world around us. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.